My name is Clara Vance, 34 years old. I thought I understood how cruel the world could be. But nothing in this life prepares you for the cold, calculated sting of ultimate family betrayal. It was a drizzly Tuesday morning at 5:45. I was sitting on my kitchen stool, watching the steam slowly rise off my hot coffee, holding the ceramic mug with both hands to warm my cold fingers. The rain tapped softly against the window pane. Suddenly, my phone buzzed across the quartz countertop. Screen lit up with my older sister's contact image. Her name was Evelyn. Evelyn almost never called me, especially not at this hour. We had always been complete opposites. I was the quiet, detail-oriented daughter who stayed in our small hometown, worked long hours, and took care of our aging father. Evelyn was the flashy, ambitious sister. She had moved to the big city, married an arrogant real estate speculator named Mark, and only came back home whenever she needed money. I picked up the phone with a strange, heavy knot forming in the bottom of my stomach. I asked her if everything was okay. There was no sigh on the other end of the line. There was no tremor in her breathing, no warmth in her voice. Just a sharp metallic silence before she finally spoke. Her words were completely devoid of any emotion. She said, "Dad passed away an hour ago from heart failure in his sleep." The world seemed to stop moving. My hand went limp and my coffee mug slid off my fingers, spilling hot liquid across my knuckles. But I did not even feel the burn. My chest tightened so fast. I could barely pull air into my lungs. I stammered, asking her what she was talking about. I told her I had just been at Dad's house on Sunday, that we had painted the back porch together, and that he was completely fine. Evelyn interrupted me instantly. Her tone was completely flat, sounding like an insurance agent reading the fine print of a canceled policy. She said, "The paramedics just pulled away with his body." And then, before I could even process my grief, she dropped the real bomb. She said, 3 weeks ago, Mark and I met with Dad's estate attorney. Dad updated his last will and testament. I sat frozen on the stool, the sound of my heart pounding like a heavy drum against my ribs. I asked her, "What attorney are you talking about?" She leaned into the receiver and said, "He left the entire lakeside property to me. The house, the land, the investment accounts, and the vintage car collection. Everything." She added, with a sliver of smug satisfaction in her voice, "The attorney said you get a small cardboard box of Mom's old photo albums from the attic. That's all." I could not process the words. My father, Arthur Vance, had always promised us that his estate would be split equally between us. We had discussed it dozens of times over family dinners. But before I could speak, I heard a second sound over the phone speaker. It was my brother-in-law Mark's voice in the background. He let out a short, wet, arrogant bark of a laugh. He chuckled and told Evelyn, "Tell her to clear her junk out of the garage by Friday. We're listing the main house on the market by the end of the month." Evelyn repeated his words coldly, telling me not to make a scene because the document was signed, notarized, and legally binding. Then she hung up the phone. I sat alone in the silence of my kitchen, the spilled coffee turning cold on the countertop. Tears blurred my vision, but beneath the agonizing wave of shock, a small flame of suspicion began to burn. My father was a proud, meticulous man. He had built a successful building supplies firm over 40 years before retiring. He was not a feeble man who could be easily tricked. But over the last 6 months, as his heart began to weaken, Evelyn and Mark had suddenly shown an overwhelming, suspicious interest in his life. They started visiting every weekend. The Mark, who had driven 2 of his own housing developments into bankruptcy, would sit in Dad's study for hours, pouring him expensive scotch and talking about tax loopholes. Evelyn would swarm around Dad, cooking meals and playing the devoted daughter she had never been. I had watched it happen with quiet discomfort, but I never raised an argument because I simply wanted Dad to be happy in his final days. I did not realize they were systematically isolating him and rewriting his legal documents behind my back. 2 days later was the funeral. Rain poured heavily from a dark sky, turning the cemetery ground into thick, clinging mud. I stood under my black umbrella, wrapped in a coat, my eyes red and swollen from endless crying. Evelyn and Mark arrived in a brand new, expensive black luxury sedan, a car I knew they could not afford on Mark's failing salary. Evelyn wore dark designer sunglasses despite the gloom, a gold chain gleaming at her neck. When the burial ended, Evelyn walked over to me, her expensive boots sinking into the mud. She looked at me and said, "I hope you are not planning to stay at the main house tonight." Mark already changed the digital locks on the front door. I looked into her eyes, searching for any trace of the sister I grew up with. There was nothing there except pure, unadulterated greed. I asked her, "How can you stand next to our father's fresh grave and talk about locking me out?" Mark stepped up beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulder and grinning down at me like he had just won a grand prize. Mark said, "It is not personal, Clara. It is simply business." Arthur realized toward the end that you did not have the vision to handle an estate of this size. He called me a simple office worker, a paper pusher who was meant for a small, quiet life. He warned me not to spend my little savings hiring a lawyer to contest the will because the signature was completely valid. They turned around and walked back to their shiny vehicle, laughing softly under their umbrella. My fists clenched inside my coat pockets so hard my nails dug into my skin. The grief was still overwhelming, but a cold, clear resolve began to take over. They thought I was weak. They thought they had outsmarted me because they snuck a lawyer into Dad's bedroom while he was on heart medication. What Mark and Evelyn failed to realize was that they had only looked at half of the picture. The next morning, I drove to my office building downtown. For the past 12 years, I was not just an employee. I was the Chief Financial Officer and Senior Operations Manager for Vance Enterprise Holdings. That was the corporate umbrella company Dad had created decades ago to manage his commercial real estate, heavy equipment assets, and corporate loans. Dad had always kept his personal assets, like his house and personal bank accounts, separate from his corporate holdings. When Mark and Evelyn manipulated Dad into signing that updated personal will, they secured everything held in his personal name. They thought they had secured the ultimate prize. What they did not know, because neither of them had ever read a business statement in their lives, was how the lakeside house was actually structured. I sat down at my desk, opened the master financial ledger, and pulled up the primary file for the property on Cedar Lane. 3 years ago, Dad wanted to perform a massive $400,000 structural renovation on the lake house, adding a boat dock and a modern kitchen. Instead of using his personal cash, he had taken out a private commercial mortgage through Vance Enterprise Holdings. The lake house itself was listed as the collateral. Under the strict corporate terms of that mortgage document, if the primary owner passed away, the full outstanding balance of the debt was required to be paid in full by the new title holders within 30 days. Otherwise, the holding company retained the absolute legal right to demand immediate settlement or initiate foreclosure. Furthermore, who held the controlling power over Vance Enterprise Holdings upon Arthur's death? It was not his personal estate. 10 years ago, when I managed the business through a major economic downturn and saved the company from falling apart, Dad quietly transferred 51% of the voting shares directly into my name. The remaining 49% was placed into an irrevocable corporate trust that named me as the sole trustee upon his passing. Dad had not given me the company through a personal will. He had transferred it to me a decade ago through a corporate restructuring that Evelyn and Mark knew nothing about. Evelyn and Mark thought they had inherited a multi-million-dollar property completely free of charge. In reality, they had just inherited a $385,000 debt payable directly to the corporation I owned. I spent the next 3 hours digging deeper into Mark's financial affairs using corporate credit software. What I found made the entire picture even clearer. Mark was drowning in severe personal debt. To buy that luxury black sedan and keep his private creditors from taking him to court, he had recently taken out a massive high-interest bridge loan using his own city townhouse as collateral. Mark was counting entirely on using Dad's $150,000 in personal savings to pay off his immediate creditors. while taking out a massive new mortgage on Dad's lake house to fund his failing schemes. They were living on borrowed time and borrowed money. They were completely blind to the trap they had walked into. I closed the computer files, leaned back in my leather chair, and took a slow, deep breath. They wanted a fight, and they thought they had already won it. Now it was time to show them how a real business operates. I did not act immediately. Revenge, if it is going to be total and complete, requires patience and quiet precision. For the first 30 days, I let them celebrate their fake victory. I watched quietly from a distance as Evelyn posted photo after photo on her social media pages. She posted pictures of herself drinking expensive wine on the lake house deck. She posted pictures of Mark sitting behind the wheel of Dad's vintage Mustang. She wrote captions about how hard work and family loyalty always lead to success. They completely ignored my existence. They did not call me, they did not check to see if I was okay, and they certainly did not offer to give me the box of Mom's old photo albums. On day 31, I set my plan into motion. First, using my authority as the sole executive officer of Vance Enterprise Holdings, I executed our corporate right to purchase the underlying primary note from the regional bank. We were now officially the sole mortgage holder on the Cedar Lane property. Second, I issued a formal corporate notice of acceleration of loan payment. Under the exact clause of the mortgage agreement, the death of the primary owner required the new title holders, Evelyn and Mark, to either pay the remaining $385,000 in full within 30 days or provide certified proof of an approved bank refinance. If they failed to satisfy either condition, the loan would fall into immediate default, allowing us to proceed with expedited commercial foreclosure. I drafted the legal letter on crisp corporate paper, signed it in dark blue ink, and had it delivered by a court process server directly to the front door of the lake house on a quiet Saturday afternoon. An hour after the process server delivered the envelope, my phone began ringing incessantly. I received 10 missed calls from Evelyn in less than 20 minutes. I received 5 missed calls from Mark. Then the frantic text messages began pouring in. Evelyn demanded to know what kind of sick joke I was playing. She typed in all capital letters, claiming that they owned the house and that I had no legal power to demand money from them. I did not answer a single call. I did not reply to a single text message. I simply set my phone face down on my desk and let the screen light up and fade back to darkness in complete silence. The following Monday morning at 8 o'clock, while I was sitting in my office drinking a fresh cup of tea, my office door slammed open. Mark shoved his way past my secretary. His face was flushed bright red, his suit jacket was unbuttoned, and his necktie was sitting crooked against his collar. Evelyn rushed in right behind him, clutching the legal documents in her manicured hand, her body shaking with pure rage. Mark slammed his open hand down onto the wooden surface of my desk, making the tea saucer rattle. He shouted at me, demanding to know what kind of illegal scam I was trying to run. He yelled that they had a notarized, legally binding will, and that Arthur had given the property to Evelyn. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice, and I did not stand up from my chair. I simply rested my hands calmly over my desk folder and looked up at them with a completely blank expression. I welcomed them quietly and asked them to take a seat. Mark barked back that he was not going to sit down. He shouted that I had no legal authority to send them a demand for $385,000. I looked at him calmly and explained the legal reality. I told him that the personal will gave Evelyn the title to the land, but it did not erase the commercial debt attached to the property. Dad had mortgaged the house to the holding company to build the custom renovations 3 years ago, and that debt was fully documented and registered with the county land office. Evelyn's eyes went wide with sudden confusion. She turned her head toward Mark, then back to me, her voice trembling as she argued that Dad owned everything outright and that he had never mentioned owing money to anyone. I replied softly, telling her that Dad told them whatever was necessary to keep them from harassing him during his final months. I reminded them that the debt belonged to the company, and as the head of the company, I had a legal obligation to enforce all outstanding contracts. Mark let out a harsh, desperate laugh. He sneered at me and said that I was nothing more than an employee, claiming that Arthur was the true owner of the entire corporate enterprise. Instead of arguing, I reached into my side desk drawer, pulled out a thick leather portfolio, and slid a certified copy of the state corporate registry across the polished wood toward them. I pointed to the official signatures on the document and explained that Dad had transferred 51% of the voting shares to me 10 years ago, and that the remaining shares had passed to me through a corporate trust upon his death. I told him that I owned 100% of the parent company, which meant that while Evelyn held the deed to the house, I held the mortgage that controlled it. Evelyn went dead pale. The color drained from her face so fast that she looked like she was going to collapse right onto the carpet. She reached out and grabbed the corner of my desk to steady her balance. She stammered out that they did not have $385,000. She cried out that they had just spent $60,000 redecorating the main living room, that they had just leased a brand new luxury vehicle, and that all of Mark's investment funds were tied up in private accounts. I told her very simply that if they did not have the cash, they should go to a traditional commercial bank and apply for a standard mortgage loan. I reminded her that she had 29 days left before the notice expired. Mark's expression shifted instantly from arrogance to complete, unadulterated terror. He knew his own financial reality better than anyone else. With his terrible credit history, his massive personal debt, and his active default notices from private lenders, no traditional bank on earth was going to lend him a single dollar. Evelyn stepped around Mark, her confident posture completely shattering into pieces. Tears began to stream down her cheeks, ruining her dark makeup. She began to plead with me, saying that we were sisters, that we were family, and that Dad would never have wanted us to fight over property. She begged me not to take away her home. I looked into her tear-filled eyes, letting the silence fill the room for several long seconds before I spoke. I asked her, "Where was that sense of family when you called me at 6 in the morning while Dad's body was still cold to tell me I was receiving nothing?" I asked her, "Where was that sisterly love when Mark stood in the background and laughed at my grief?" I asked her, "Where was your compassion when you changed the locks on my childhood home and threw away my mother's final memories?" Evelyn swallowed hard, completely unable to utter a single word of response. I picked up my pen, opened my file folder, and told her that she had wanted our father's assets, and now she had them. I told her to pay her bill, and then I asked my secretary to show them out of the building. The next 4 weeks were a complete demonstration of total financial collapse for Mark and Evelyn. Mark ran frantically from one financial institution to another, trying desperately to secure a refinance loan. But every single bank rejected his application within hours of reviewing his background. To make matters even worse for them, Mark had been relying on using Dad's $150,000 in personal bank savings to satisfy his private hard money lenders. But when Dad's personal estate entered the standard probate process, the county judge froze all personal accounts until an investigation into unpaid medical bills and state taxes could be completed. Without access to Dad's cash, Mark defaulted on his high-interest bridge loan. 2 weeks before my corporate mortgage deadline arrived, Mark's private lenders filed an immediate foreclosure action against his primary city townhouse. They were getting hit from every direction, losing money on every front and falling into a deep financial hole. On day 30, the corporate acceleration deadline officially expired without payment. Evelyn and Mark had failed to produce the cash, and they had failed to secure a loan. The very next morning, my legal team filed for expedited commercial foreclosure on the Cedar Lane house. Because it was a corporate debt contract rather than a standard consumer mortgage, the legal process moved with extreme speed. Within 6 weeks, the local court issued a final order placing the lakeside property up for public auction on the steps of the county courthouse. The day of the public auction was crisp and clear. I arrived early, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, standing quietly near the stone pillars at the back of the building lobby. A few minutes before the bidding began, Evelyn and Mark walked through the heavy glass doors. They looked utterly broken. Evelyn's expensive clothes were wrinkled and unwashed. Her hair was pulled back into a messy knot, and heavy gray circles sat beneath her eyes. Mark looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 months. His shoulders slouched forward as he clutched a warm paper folder. They had lost their city townhouse to private foreclosure 3 days earlier. They were currently living out of a small, cheap extended-stay hotel on the highway, surrounded by plastic bags and cardboard boxes. The auctioneer stepped up to the wooden podium and cleared his throat. He announced the details for the commercial note on 104 Cedar Lane, stating that the opening bid was set at the exact debt amount of $385,000. A heavy silence fell over the crowded room. A few local investors looked through their paperwork, but nobody raised a hand. The debt was substantial and the market was uncertain. The auctioneer called out to the room, asking if anyone was willing to place the opening bid of $385,000. I stepped forward from the back pillar and raised my wooden bidding paddle calmly. I spoke clearly, stating that Vance Enterprise Holdings was placing a credit bid for the full amount of $385,000. The auctioneer looked across the floor, asked for any higher offers, and then brought his heavy wooden gavel down against the podium with a sharp, loud crack that echoed off the high walls. The lake house, along with every single item left inside the building, was officially completely owned by my corporation. Evelyn let out a loud gasp, her leather handbag slipping from her fingers and dropping onto the marble floor. She turned around wildly and saw me standing near the back of the room. She ran toward me, her heels clicking loudly against the floor, her eyes wide with total desperation. She grabbed my jacket sleeves with both hands, sobbing hysterically. She cried out that I had bought the house, that I owned it now, and she begged me to let them stay there as paying tenants. She wept, telling me that they had nowhere else to go, that the bank had taken their city house, that their car had been repossessed, and that they were living in a tiny motel room. She pleaded with me, crying that they had nothing left in this world. Mark walked over slowly, his head bowed down, completely stripped of his former confidence. He could not bring himself to look me in the eye. He mumbled softly, telling me that he was sorry, that he was wrong about me, and that he should never have laughed at my grief. I slowly stepped backward, loosening Evelyn's shaking fingers from my clothing. I straightened my suit jacket, looked down at both of them, and spoke with absolute calm. I told her, "You did not just try to steal my inheritance, Evelyn. You tried to erase my existence entirely." I reminded her, "You took delight in my pain when our father died, and you celebrated my loss." Evelyn collapsed onto her knees on the cold marble floor, clutching at my shoes, weeping uncontrollably, begging me to remember that she was my sister. I looked down at her and told her that an official notice to vacate had been issued that morning. I informed her that she had exactly 24 hours to collect her personal clothing from the property. I added that at noon the following day, the security locks would be replaced and private guards would be posted at the front gate. If either of them set foot on the property after 12 o'clock, they would be immediately arrested for criminal trespass. I turned on my heel and walked calmly down the wide stone steps toward the street. Behind me, I could hear Evelyn's desperate cries echoing through the tall archways of the courthouse, while Mark tried silently to pull her up from the floor. For the first time in months, the heavy, suffocating weight in my chest was completely gone. I stepped out into the bright sunlight, took a deep, clean breath of cold morning air, and felt an overwhelming sense of stillness. Justice had finally been done. Greed has a strange way of blinding arrogant people to the simple reality right in front of them. Evelyn and Mark were so completely focused on taking what they thought was an easy fortune that they never stopped to look at who was actually keeping the entire foundation together. In the end, they traded their home, their reputation, and their entire future for a brief moment of cruelty. If this story brought you a sense of complete justice, please make sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories, and share your thoughts in the comments section down below. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next narrative.